The fluorescent lights hummed faintly above the small office where Lily Morgan sat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. 20 years old, her shoulders drawn inward. She looked younger than her age, fragile, like a bird that had forgotten how to sing. She wore a plain blouse, her dark hair pulled back into a simple ponytail. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. That was the point. For most of her life, Lily had learned the safest way to survive was to be invisible. Diane Harper, the HR manager, scanned the resume in her hands, pausing every now and then to glance over the top of the paper at the girl sitting across from her. Diane was a woman in her 40s, experienced enough to recognize when someone carried the weight of a heavy past. She had seen hundreds of candidates, but something about this girl tugged at her chest. Still, she had to ask the obvious question. "You're very young," Diane said slowly, "and you're applying for a custodial position. It's not an easy job. Why here?" Lily lifted her eyes briefly, then lowered them again, as if the air itself pressed too heavily against her. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small set of laminated cards, edges worn from use. Her fingers hesitated, then flipped to the one she needed. "I cannot speak, but I understand everything." Diane blinked, her lips parting. "Oh!" Lily quickly shuffled to another card and raised it. "I want to work. I will do my best." For a moment, Diane didn't know what to say. She had read the note in the resume, but it was different, seeing it this way. The girl's silence wasn't just a detail on paper, it was her reality. Diane set the resume down, leaning back in her chair, studying Lily more carefully. The file had mentioned an accident, a car crash when she was barely a child. Both parents gone in an instant. Lily had survived, but the trauma had taken her voice. Doctors had called it psychological mutism, trauma-induced vocal cord dysfunction. The foster system had taken her in after that, moving her from one home to another. Bright on paper, good grades, even a high school diploma with honors, but no college would take her. Employers turned her away. Who wanted to hire a mute girl in a world that demanded quick responses, phone calls, presentations? Must have been hard, Diane murmured, almost to herself. Lily's hands tightened on the cards. She nodded faintly. She had no words to give. Only gestures, only silence. Diane tapped the resume with her pen. "Your record's good. You did well in school. You could have aimed higher, you know. Why settle for janitorial work?" Lily's shoulders lifted slightly, then dropped. She shuffled through her cards again and raised one. "No one else would hire me." The blunt honesty of it caught Diane off guard. There was no self-pity in Lily's eyes, just a quiet acceptance of a world that had slammed its doors shut in her face. Diane exhaled, closing the folder. "Well, this company, we do have programs to integrate people with disabilities. It's not glamorous work, and I can't promise much pay, but it's honest. Floors need cleaning. Offices need tidying. We could use someone reliable." Lily froze, as though afraid she had misread the woman's words. Then, slowly, her trembling hands dug into her bag and pulled out another card, one that had been smudged with age from how often she used it. "Thank you." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. It was fragile like glass. For the first time in years, hope sparked in her chest. Diane softened. She had no idea what storms this girl had weathered, but something in her eyes said she had endured more than most adults twice her age. "All right, 3 months probation. We'll call it part of our disability support program. You keep your head down, do the work well, and we'll make it permanent. Fair?" Lily's head bobbed quickly, her hands fumbling to find the right card. "Yes." Diane offered a small smile in return. "Then welcome to the team, Lily." It was such a simple sentence, one Diane had said countless times before to countless employees. But to Lily it was everything. She walked out of that HR office, holding her worn notepad close to her chest. The hallway stretched out ahead of her. Sterile walls, glass doors, muted chatter echoing from cubicles. The corporate world, cold and different. And yet, for the first time, those walls did not push her out. They let her in. As she stepped into the elevator, Lily let out a slow breath. The trauma of the past still weighed on her. Shards of glass, the scream of her mother, the silence that followed. A silence she had never escaped. But now, she had a badge clipped to her blouse and a faint trace of belonging. It wasn't much, but for Lily Morgan, it was the first fragile thread of a new beginning. At first, Lily Morgan tried to convince herself that this new job could be a clean slate. Every morning, she arrived 10 minutes early, uniform crisp, hair neatly tied back, hands folded around the cleaning cart as though it were her anchor. She polished the glass doors until they gleamed, vacuumed carpets in quiet rhythms, and wiped down conference tables that smelled faintly of coffee and ink. Her silence, she believed, could become her strength here. If she stayed invisible, maybe no one would notice her enough to be cruel. But people noticed. By the end of her first week, whispers followed her through the hallways like shadows. "There goes the mute girl," someone muttered near the water cooler. "Creepy, isn't it? She never says a word." Laughter followed, sharp and careless, leaving Lily to grip her notepad tighter inside her pocket. The cruelty grew bolder with time. In the elevators, when the doors closed and she was trapped with other employees, their words cut deepest. Chad Griffin, a mid-level manager with too much swagger and not enough conscience, took special delight in making her the punchline of every ride. "Hey, doll!" he sneered one morning, leaning against the mirrored wall with his arms crossed. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" His friend snickered. Lily shifted her gaze to the floor, praying the elevator would move faster. "No, no," Chad continued, voice rising. "She's like a dumb doll. Pretty face, empty mouth. Right, guys?" The men around him laughed again, one even imitating the way Lily held her notepad, mouthing silent words like a cruel mime. Her cheeks burned, but she stayed still, shoulders tucked in, as if shrinking small enough could make her vanish. Another day, Chad took it further. As the elevator lurched upward, he suddenly shoved her shoulder. The movement was casual for him, devastating for her. Lily stumbled sideways, bumping against the steel railing. The notepad and laminated cards slipped from her hands, scattering across the floor. Chad bent down and snatched one up, reading aloud in mock seriousness. "I cannot speak, but I understand everything." "Oh, perfect. She's like some kind of teleprompter. What do you think, boys? Should we use her for speeches?" They howled with laughter. Lily dropped to her knees, scrambling to gather her cards, but Chad flicked them out of her reach, like scraps tossed to an animal. "Careful, freak," he said. "Wouldn't want to lose your precious vocabulary." The elevator dinged. She bolted out the doors, clutching what cards she could salvage, her heart pounding so violently she thought her chest might shatter. She fled to the janitor's closet, pressing her back against the shelves until her breathing slowed. But no matter how tightly she pressed her palms over her ears, the echo of their laughter followed her. It wasn't only Chad. Even the women whispered behind her back, rolling their eyes as she passed. "Bet she got the job because she's someone's pity case," one secretary muttered. "Or worse, maybe she's sleeping with HR. Who else would hire a mute janitor?" Another giggled cruelly, pretending to mime sweeping a floor with exaggerated strokes. Security guards leered when she walked by, eyes lingering too long on her figure. "Nice one," one guard murmured to the other. "She can't scream, you know." They both laughed, leaving Lily's stomach cold with fear. Each day became a gauntlet. She timed her cleaning routes to avoid crowded hallways, chose the service elevator when she could, and carried her notepad like armor. But nothing shielded her completely. One Friday afternoon, the building buzzed with weekend energy. Chad and a group of colleagues cornered her by the vending machines. "Hey, mute girl," he called, blocking her path. "What do you even do here besides mop up our messes?" Lily raised her notepad with trembling hands, flipping to the card that said, "Excuse me." She tried to sidestep him. Chad slapped the card from her hand, sending it fluttering to the floor. "Excuse me," he mocked in a high-pitched voice, earning another round of laughter from his friends. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a menacing whisper. "Don't ignore me, doll. I don't like being ignored." Her throat tightened painfully. She wanted to scream, to shove him away, to speak just one word. But nothing came, only silence. The humiliation gnawed at her. By the time she returned to her cleaning closet, tears blurred her vision. She dropped onto the small stool inside, buried her face in her hands, and shook silently. The world outside her tiny space was merciless. No matter how hard she worked, no matter how invisible she tried to be, cruelty found her. She thought of her parents, their faces flashing in fragments, the warm smile of her mother, the firm hand of her father guiding her across a crosswalk, and then the crash. Shattered glass, screams that ended too soon. Her voice had vanished that night, stolen along with them. And now, years later, the silence still defined her. The office hallways echoed with life, but to Lily they were a cage of whispers and jeers. Every step reminded her she was different, marked easy prey. She tucked her cards back into their worn pouch, wiped her eyes with her sleeve, and forced herself to stand. The shift wasn't over. She still had bathrooms to scrub and floors to mop. But inside, a heaviness spread, pressing against her ribs until it was hard to breathe. No one in that office seemed to see her as a human being. To them, she was a joke, a curiosity, a mute doll to throw against the wall and laugh when she shattered. And Lily had no voice to tell them otherwise. The elevator doors slid shut with a metallic sigh, trapping Lily once again in the confined space she had grown to dread. Chad Griffin lounged against the panel, his tie loosened, his smirk sharp. His entourage filled the space with their easy laughter, the scent of cologne and arrogance thick in the air. "Well, look who it is," Chad announced, pointing his chin at Lily as if she were some strange exhibit. "Our little mute janitor. How's life in silence, sweetheart?" Lily kept her eyes on the floor, clutching her notepad like a lifeline. Chad mimicked her posture, pressing his hands together and mouthing nonsense sounds, mocking the way she tried to communicate. His friends burst into cruel laughter. "Hey, maybe she's like Siri," one of them said. "Hold up a card, and she'll read it out loud in her head." The laughter grew louder, bouncing off the mirrored walls. Lily shrank further into the corner, wishing the elevator would swallow her whole. Then, unexpectedly, another voice cut through. "Knock it off." The words were quiet, but firm enough to stall the laughter. Heads turned toward the corner, where a young man stood awkwardly with a folder tucked under his arm. He was lanky, glasses slipping down his nose, his dress shirt slightly wrinkled as though he had rushed out the door that morning. His name tag read Noah Bennett, intern. Chad arched a brow. "Excuse me." Noah shifted his weight, but didn't back down. "She hasn't done anything to you. Leave her alone." For a beat, silence hung in the air. Then Chad's grin returned, wider, sharper. Well, well, look at this. The intern's got a backbone." He stepped closer, towering over Noah. "You trying to be a hero, kid?" The others snickered, egging him on. Noah's voice wavered, but held. "It's not about being a hero. It's just cruel. You're all laughing at someone who can't even answer back. That doesn't make you strong. It makes you pathetic." The words landed like a slap. Chad's grin faltered before twisting into a scowl. "Watch your mouth," he growled. "You're just a temp around here. One word from me, and you'll be out before you can spell resume." Noah swallowed hard but didn't look away. His knuckles tightened on the folder, his jaw set. The tension was thick enough to choke. Then the elevator dinged, and the door slid open. Chad let out a sharp laugh, clapping Noah on the shoulder hard enough to jostle him. "Careful, intern. Heroes don't last long around here." With that, he sauntered out, his pack of followers trailing behind, their mocking eyes cutting back at both Lily and Noah. The elevator doors closed again, leaving behind only the two of them. Lily crouched quickly, gathering the cards that had fallen in the scuffle. Her hands trembled, her breath ragged. She half expected Noah to turn away like everyone else, to distance himself before he too became a target. But he didn't. He bent down beside her, helping collect the scattered cards. His movements were gentle, deliberate, as if he knew how much each card meant. When the last one was gathered, he held it out to her. Their fingers brushed briefly. "They're just idiots," Noah said softly, his voice carrying no trace of mockery. He straightened and offered her a reassuring nod. "Don't listen to them." Lily froze, the words settling deep inside her like warmth seeping into frozen soil. For the first time in years, someone had stepped into the storm on her behalf. Someone had looked at her and seen more than a target, more than a mute girl holding a notepad. Her throat tightened, not with fear this time, but with something dangerously close to gratitude. She lowered her gaze, hiding the shimmer in her eyes. She wanted to write a thank you, to show him how much his small act meant, but her hand shook too much to find the right card. Noah didn't press. He simply offered her a small, almost shy smile, and the elevator continued its climb in silence, a silence that, for once, didn't feel suffocating. When the doors opened again, he stepped out first, holding the door with one hand so she could wheel her cart through. His gesture was so casual, so unassuming, yet it carried more kindness than Lily had received in months. As she pushed her cart down the hallway, she felt the weight of eyes still on her, the whispers still buzzing in the distance. But now, for the first time, the cruelty didn't seem quite as crushing. Someone had spoken up. Someone had told her not to listen. And though she couldn't say it, Lily Morgan would never forget it. Over the next few weeks, Lily and Noah found themselves crossing paths more often. It wasn't planned, at least not at first. He would pause by her cleaning cart to ask how her day was going, even though he knew she couldn't answer with words. She would flip her notepad open, scrawling short replies in careful handwriting. He read them patiently, never rushing, never making her feel like her silence was a burden. Slowly, something unfamiliar began to take root between them. Trust. One evening, after most of the office had emptied out and the sun dipped low behind the Minneapolis skyline, Noah lingered near the lobby where Lily was wiping down the glass doors. He shifted nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. "Hey," he said, his voice hesitant. "My mom's been asking why I stay so late all the time. I told her about you. Would you maybe want to come over for dinner sometime?" Lily froze, rag in hand. No one had invited her anywhere in years. She blinked at him, unsure if he was serious. His smile was small, almost apologetic, but genuine. She opened her notepad, her pen trembling slightly. "Are you sure?" "Of course," Noah said quickly. "She doesn't get out much anymore. She's been sick for a while. But she loves company, and I think she'd like you." Lily stared at the words she had just written, then at his earnest face. Slowly she nodded. Later that evening, they walked together through the quiet neighborhood streets, away from the steel and glass of downtown. Noah led her to a modest brick apartment building with peeling paint and squeaky steps. Inside, the air smelled faintly of chamomile tea and old wood. The furniture was worn but clean, every surface dusted with care. It wasn't much, but it radiated warmth in a way the corporate office never could. "Mom." Noah called gently as he pushed open the door. "I'm home, and I brought a friend." A frail figure appeared from the kitchen doorway. Mrs. Bennet was tall but gaunt, her frame diminished by illness. Her hair, once dark, had thinned and grayed, and her skin was pale, almost translucent, with the delicate blue of veins showing beneath. Yet her eyes, a soft hazel, lit up the moment she saw Lily. "Well, aren't you lovely?" she said with a weak but kind smile. "Come in, sweetheart. Don't be shy." Lily hesitated on the threshold, clutching her notepad. But Mrs. Bennet crossed the room slowly, steadying herself on the back of a chair, and reached for her hands. Her touch was light but steady, her smile full of acceptance. "You're welcome here any time, sweet girl," she said softly. Something inside Lily cracked. She swallowed hard, blinking fast, as if her body didn't quite know what to do with warmth so freely given. She scribbled a quick note and turned it toward Mrs. Bennet. "Thank you. It means a lot." Mrs. Bennet's eyes softened further. "No need to thank me. You've already brought light into this place just by walking through the door. Dinner was simple. Soup warmed on the stove, bread sliced at the table. But Lily couldn't remember the last time a meal had tasted so comforting. She sat quietly, listening as Noah and his mother spoke, occasionally writing small notes that Noah read aloud so his mother wouldn't miss her thoughts. There was laughter, gentle and unforced. For once, she wasn't a shadow in the room. She belonged. When the meal ended, Mrs. Bennet insisted Lily stay a while longer. They sat together in the living room, the lamplight casting soft golden hues across the faded wallpaper. Lily perched on the edge of the sofa, nervous but drawn in by the older woman's presence. "You've been through so much, haven't you?" Mrs. Bennet said, her voice tender. "I can see it in your eyes, but you're stronger than you think." Lily bit her lip, blinking back the tears that threatened. Her pen moved slowly over the page. "I lost my parents long ago. Since then, no one has called me family." Mrs. Bennet's hand reached out, covering Lily's. "Then let me be the first. You're part of ours now, if you'll have us." The words shattered the last of Lily's composure. Silent sobs shook her shoulders as she pressed her face into her hands. She hadn't cried like this in years, not from fear or pain, but from the overwhelming ache of being seen, being wanted. Mrs. Bennet pulled her close, thin arms surprisingly steady as they wrapped around her. "Hush, sweetheart. You don't have to be alone anymore." For the first time since she was a child, Lily let herself be held, and in that fragile embrace, she felt a piece of herself begin to heal. Rumors spread through the office like wildfire. Something was wrong, seriously wrong. Whispers filled the break rooms, carried down the halls, woven into every conversation Lily overheard as she went about her silent work. The company had suffered a blow. Confidential files had been leaked to a competitor, costing thousands in lost contracts. An internal investigation had begun. Security teams in black suits combed through computers, examining emails, monitoring access logs. Employees grew restless, fearful. If there was a traitor among them, who would it be? Lily listened quietly as she scrubbed tables and emptied trash bins, her hands steady though her heart thudded. She had nothing to do with data or computers. Her world was mops, buckets, and rags. No one would suspect her. But she worried for those who did sit at desks, fingers hovering over keyboards all day, unaware that suspicion now clouded the air above them. One afternoon, during lunch hour, the break room buzzed with tension. Employees picked at their food in uneasy silence, eyes flicking toward the doorway each time it opened. Noah Bennet sat at a corner table, textbooks spread out beside his tray, studying between bites of a sandwich. His face looked tired, shadows under his eyes from late nights, juggling work and caring for his mother. The door slammed open. Two men in dark suits stepped inside, their expressions cold, their movements deliberate. Conversations froze. Forks hovered midair. "You, Noah Bennet." One of them pointed straight at him. Noah blinked in confusion. "Me? You need to come with us." He pushed back his chair slowly, alarm widening his eyes. "What's going on?" The second man produced a folder and flipped it open. "Your workstation has been flagged. Sensitive data was found on your computer, data that was transmitted outside this building." The room gasped. Lily's rag slipped from her hand, landing with a soft thud against the tile floor. Her blood turned to ice. Noah's face drained of color. "That's impossible," he stammered. I never." His voice rose, trembling with disbelief. "I didn't do this." The men stepped forward, each seizing an arm. Noah struggled, his chair scraping against the floor. "Let me explain. You've got it wrong." But his protests fell into the void. They dragged him toward the hallway, past rows of staring eyes. Lily stood frozen, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the rest of the office. She wanted to run to him, to shout the truth, that Noah was kind, incapable of treachery. But her throat clenched, locked as always, and no sound came. She could only watch as the one person who had ever defended her was pulled away like a criminal. Mr. Richard Campbell's office loomed at the end of the hall. The CEO himself waited, stern and commanding, a man with little patience for betrayal. Lily lingered near the doorway, clutching her notepad against her chest, unseen by most, but close enough to glimpse what unfolded. They pushed Noah into a chair opposite Mr. Campbell's desk. The older man adjusted his glasses, flipping through printed documents with deliberate care. "Mr. Bennett," he began, voice cold, "our investigation has traced multiple data breaches back to your terminal. We've confirmed transfers of sensitive files from your account." Noah shook his head wildly. "No, sir, that's not right. I swear, I never touched any of that data. I don't even have clearance for those files." Campbell's gaze hardened. "And yet, here we are. The evidence is overwhelming. Whether you acted alone or for someone else, the fact remains. The data left this building through your computer." "I've been set up." Noah's voice cracked. His hands gripped the arms of the chair, knuckles white. "Please, you have to believe me. Someone planted it. I wouldn't risk my future like this. My mom, she depends on me." "I wouldn't," Campbell cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Enough. Your internship is terminated effective immediately. You'll be required to sign separation papers and, given the financial damage, expect legal counsel to pursue compensation for losses. Consider yourself fortunate we're not involving law enforcement yet." Noah's breath hitched. "You can't do this. You can't just—" "I can, and I have." Campbell's voice brooked no argument. "You'll vacate your desk today." The guards moved to seize Noah again. He slumped, shoulders collapsing under the weight of the sentence. His eyes darted toward the doorway, and for a fleeting second they met Lily's. Her chest seized. His gaze was a plea, raw, desperate, filled with disbelief. He had fought for her once, in the elevator, standing between her and cruelty. Now she stood frozen, useless, unable to return the favor. The guards pulled him to his feet. He struggled once more, his voice breaking. "I didn't do this." The words echoed down the hallway, carried on a tide of anguish and rage. Employees gathered, whispering, some shaking their heads, others pitying, most avoiding his eyes. To them, the case was closed. The intern was guilty. Lily's hands shook as she clutched her notepad, nails biting into the cardboard cover. She wanted to scream, to throw herself into the room and demand they listen. But her silence was a prison, and in it she remained chained, forced to watch as the only friend she had was led away, condemned by lies. By the time the door closed behind them, Lily's knees had gone weak. She slid against the wall, breath shallow, vision blurred by tears. The one person who had ever believed in her, who had spoken for her, was gone. For Lily Morgan, it felt as though the world had tipped upside down again, dragging her back into the same helpless void she had lived in since childhood. The office that had once seemed like a chance at belonging now pulsed with betrayal, and the faint light she had found in Noah Bennett flickered, threatened by the darkness closing in. Days passed, but the tension in the office didn't fade. If anything, it thickened, clinging to every whispered conversation, every suspicious glance. Noah Bennett's absence was a wound Lily felt constantly. She caught herself glancing toward the cubicle he used to occupy, half expecting his lanky frame to appear with a shy smile, ready to offer her a kind word. But the desk stayed empty, his nameplate already gone. Rumors continued. Some believed the intern guilty. Others thought he was unlucky enough to be caught in someone else's mess. No one said the truth aloud. Not when Chad Griffin's laughter filled the hallways louder than ever, sharp and triumphant. Lily kept her head down, pushing her cart, wiping surfaces invisible as always. Yet the silence around her burned differently now. It was no longer just the silence of being ignored. It was the silence of knowing, deep in her gut, that Noah had been framed. One evening, as she finished emptying bins near the back offices, she noticed the faint sound of voices drifting through a partially open door. The room beyond was dimly lit, hazy with cigarette smoke despite company policy. Chad Griffin leaned against the window, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. Around him lounged two of his closest allies, their jackets off, ties loosened, arrogance thick in the air. Lily froze, her heart hammering. Instinct told her to leave, to avoid being caught. But something in their tone made her stay, pressed against the wall just outside the doorway, the mop still in her hands. That idiot intern made the perfect scapegoat, Chad said, exhaling a long stream of smoke, lips curling into a smirk. Lily's blood ran cold. One of the men chuckled. Yeah, poor kid never saw it coming. We wiped everything except his terminal. Security ate it up. Clean, simple. Campbell's so convinced he did it, another added, laughing. He'll never look at us. Chad grinned, flicking ash onto the carpet. Exactly. By the time they realize anything's off, the deal will be sealed. We'll be untouchable. And me. He tapped his chest. I'll be running this place. Lily's grip tightened on the mop handle until her knuckles whitened. Her pulse roared in her ears. They had framed Noah. They had ruined his life, his reputation, his livelihood, just to climb higher. And the contract, one man asked. Chad's eyes gleamed. Tomorrow morning, once it's signed, we'll have leverage over Campbell himself. This company will be ours to steer. Promotions, bonuses, everything we've been working toward. And no one will suspect a thing. The men clinked their coffee mugs together in a mock toast, laughter filling the smoke-filled air. Outside the doorway, Lily trembled. Anger boiled beneath her skin, hotter than anything she'd felt in years. Her silence had always been her prison, but now it felt like it might break her apart. She wanted to burst into the room, to scream the truth, to tear the smug expressions from their faces. But she couldn't, not yet. She backed away quietly, her heart pounding, until she reached the hallway again. The mop rattled against the bucket as her hand shook. She leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. Noah's face rose in her mind, his earnest eyes, his quiet courage, the way he had told her not to listen to the cruel ones. He had been her voice when she had none, and now, because of them, he had been silenced. Hot tears blurred her vision, but beneath them was fire. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let Chad Griffin win. If that contract was signed, not only would he tighten his grip on the company, but Noah's name would remain forever stained. Justice would vanish into smoke, just like the haze filling that room. Her chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. She pressed her palms against the cool wall, trying to steady herself. For so long, she had been powerless, muted, a shadow. But this time she would act. It terrified her. She had no plan, no voice, no allies. Just the raw certainty burning inside her. She could not stay silent any longer. The next morning, Chad Griffin would walk into that conference room, expecting to secure his future with a flourish of a pen. But Lily Morgan would be there too, and she would not let him win. The morning of the deal dawned bright and crisp, sunlight bouncing off the glass towers of downtown Minneapolis. Inside the office, tension thrummed like a taut wire. Employees whispered in corners, their voices edged with anticipation. Today was the day the contract that would define the company's future was about to be signed. Lily Morgan wheeled her cleaning cart down the polished hallway, her eyes drawn to the large conference room at the far end. Through the glass walls, she could see executives in suits arranging binders and water pitchers, preparing for the arrival of their prestigious clients. At the center of it all, Chad Griffin stood tall, his grin sharp, his confidence radiating like poison disguised as charm. Her hands clenched at her sides. She heard again the words he'd spoken in that smoke-filled room. Tomorrow morning, once it's signed, the company will be ours. The memory made her stomach twist. Noah's ruined face flashed in her mind. His desperate voice, "I didn't do this," still echoed in her ears. She had done nothing then, trapped in her silence. But she would not remain silent now. When the clients arrived, sleek suits, leather briefcases, smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, the atmosphere in the conference room shifted into a delicate dance of power and pleasantries. Handshakes, introductions, the rustle of papers sliding across the table. Lily slowed her cart as she passed the door, pretending to wipe a smudge on the glass. Her heart pounded so violently she thought it might crack her ribs. She had no plan beyond the one fierce certainty that burned inside her. Stop the contract. Stop Chad. As she pushed the door open with quiet deference, no one paid her any attention. She moved to the side table, where the coffee carafe sat steaming beside porcelain cups. Her hands trembled as she poured. The room hummed with conversation, voices rising and falling around phrases like projected growth and long-term partnership. She lifted the cup carefully, her fingers damp with sweat. Step by step, she approached the table where the papers lay stacked in neat piles, the ink fresh, the pens poised. Chad's eyes flicked toward her briefly, dismissing her presence as nothing more than background noise. And then, with a deliberate stumble, Lily tipped the cup forward. Scalding coffee cascaded across the crisp white pages, bleeding through the contracts, spreading in dark stains that consumed signatures waiting to be written. Gasps filled the air. A client lurched backward, cursing under his breath as drops splattered across his sleeve. "What the hell?" one executive shouted, leaping to his feet. Chad's face drained of color. "Are you insane?" he roared, slamming his hand on the table. The clients muttered furiously, their composure unraveling. "This is unacceptable. Unprofessional," one barked, shoving his chair back. Another snapped his briefcase shut. "We don't do business with companies that can't even maintain order during negotiations." Within moments, the room descended into chaos. The visitors stormed toward the door, ignoring Chad's desperate attempts to placate them. "Wait, please, this isn't what it looks like. Give us another chance." But the slam of the glass door cut him off, final and damning. Lily stood rooted to the spot, coffee dripping from the table's edge onto the carpet. Her chest rose and fell in ragged breaths, but her eyes never left Chad's. For the first time, his mask cracked, rage and fear flashing in equal measure. "What have you done?" he hissed, his voice low and venomous. The answer came not from her lips, but from the heavy footsteps that approached. Mr. Richard Campbell entered the room, his gaze sweeping over the spilled contracts, the angry employees, and finally settling on Lily. His expression darkened. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice like ice. "In my office. Now." The room fell silent as she followed him out, her steps unsteady, her hands trembling at her sides. Every pair of eyes burned into her back, most filled with contempt, some with pity. She could feel Chad stare like knives against her skin. Inside Campbell's office, the door clicked shut behind them. He turned, his jaw tight, his eyes blazing. "Do you realize what you've done? That contract was worth millions. Years of work. And you," his voice cut through her like shards of glass. But Lily couldn't let it end this way. The fire inside her, stoked by weeks of humiliation and Noah's undeserved ruin, erupted. Her chest tightened, her throat constricted. Yet for the first time in years, something broke through the wall of silence. "They're trying to steal from you," she said. The words were hoarse, fragile, but they were words, real, audible words. Campbell froze, eyes widening in shock. Her voice trembled, but once freed, it would not stop. "Chad planned this. I heard everything. They framed Noah. They planted the files. The contract, it's all part of their plan to take control." For a heartbeat, silence swallowed the room. The only sound was Lily's ragged breathing, the rush of blood in her ears. She stood trembling, her voice weak but steady, her eyes locked on the man who held the company's future in his hands. It was the first time she had spoken in years, and she had spoken not for herself, but for truth. For a long moment after Lily's trembling words, Mr. Richard Campbell only stared at her, his face unreadable. The silence pressed down like a weight. Then he drew a slow breath, folding his arms. "You expect me to believe that my manager, one of my most trusted men, has orchestrated corporate theft." His tone was sharp, skeptical, but his eyes narrowed as if testing the edges of her resolve. Lily's throat ached. Speaking had torn something raw inside her, but she forced the words out again, faint yet unbroken. "I heard them. In the smoke room. They said Noah was the scapegoat, that they erased everything except his terminal." Campbell's jaw tightened. He studied her for several seconds before finally pressing the intercom button on his desk. Security. Assemble the compliance team. Full audit. Effective immediately. The command reverberated through the building. Within hours, investigators were combing through servers, cross-checking files, and reviewing access logs that had been overlooked before. What emerged was a damning pattern. Deleted records pointing to Chad Griffin and his circle, inconsistencies in system activity, and fragments of communications that corroborated Lily's claim. By evening, the truth was undeniable. Chad had orchestrated the breach, planting the evidence on Noah's computer to divert suspicion. The security team marched him and his accomplices out of the building in front of stunned employees. His protests, angry, frantic, rang hollow now. You can't prove anything. This is a setup. But the very words condemned him, echoing the lies he had once used against Noah. Watching from the hallway, Lily felt her knees weaken. For weeks she had been powerless, trapped in silence while cruelty reigned unchecked. Now justice unfolded before her eyes, not with shouting, but with evidence, with truth, with the weight of what she had dared to say. The next morning, the entire company was summoned to the atrium. The space buzzed with confusion and speculation, hundreds of employees crowding around, waiting for answers. Mr. Campbell stood at the front, his presence commanding. Beside him, flanked by security, Chad and his allies hung their heads in defeat as they were escorted out once more. Campbell raised a hand for silence. His voice carried firmly across the room. Yesterday, this company stood on the brink of disaster. We were nearly compromised from within. But thanks to the courage of one individual, the truth has come to light. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as he turned, extending a hand toward the quiet figure standing just behind him. Lily Morgan, Campbell said, his voice resonant. This woman saved us all. For a moment, the atrium seemed suspended in stillness. Then applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling until it thundered through the space. Lily stood frozen, her face pale, her hands trembling as every eye turned toward her. Campbell gestured gently. Come, say something if you will. Her legs felt like stone, but she forced them to move, step by step, until she stood at the front. The applause softened into silence. Dozens of faces watched her, faces that had mocked, belittled, ignored. Now their expressions were different, curious, respectful, even admiring. Her heart hammered painfully in her chest. She clutched the edge of the podium, her fingers white against the wood. For a moment, fear threatened to clamp down again, to drag her back into the silence that had ruled her life for so long. Then she looked past them, to where Noah stood at the edge of the crowd. He had returned that morning, his name cleared, his shoulders squared again with quiet dignity. Their eyes met, and he gave her the smallest nod, steady and reassuring. Lily drew in a shaky breath. Her lips parted. The words came haltingly, fragile but audible. Thank you for giving me back my voice. The words hung in the air, soft yet piercing. For Lily, they were more than gratitude. They were a declaration, a truth wrested from years of silence. The atrium erupted again in applause, louder this time, echoing off the glass walls. Some employees wiped their eyes. Others looked down, ashamed of the ways they had once laughed at her. Lily stood there, trembling, yet stronger than she had ever been. For so long she had been invisible, voiceless. But in the moment of greatest need, she had spoken, and her voice had carried further than she ever imagined. Justice had come, not with shouts of vengeance, but with the undeniable weight of truth. In the weeks that followed, the office slowly stitched itself back together. The shadows Chad Griffin had cast were gone, replaced by a cautious sense of renewal. Lily Morgan was no longer just the janitor in the background. Her name was spoken with respect, her courage whispered about in the hallways. She had saved the company, and Mr. Campbell made sure everyone knew it. One morning, she was summoned to his office again. This time there was no anger in his expression. Instead, he gestured for her to sit and slid a letter across the desk. "You've proven yourself braver than most people here," he said firmly. "We want to recognize that. There's a bonus for your service and, more importantly, an offer. If you're willing to continue your education, we'll support you. There's a position waiting in administration when you're ready. What do you say?" Lily's eyes blurred with tears as she traced the words on the paper. Her hand trembled as she whispered, still hoarse but audible, "Thank you." For her, it wasn't just an opportunity. It was proof that her voice, fragile as it was, had been heard. Noah returned to the office soon after, his record cleared, his name restored. He was offered a permanent position, his diligence and loyalty finally recognized. Yet his attention, more often than not, drifted toward Lily. He found reasons to linger by her desk, to carry her books when she began night classes, to walk her home after long days. It was during one of those evenings, beneath the soft glow of streetlights outside the old brick apartment building, that he finally spoke the words he had carried for months. He held a small velvet box in his hands, his expression nervous but steady. "Lily," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "you've been through more than anyone should. And yet, you're the strongest person I know. I don't just want to stand by you at work. I want to stand by you in everything. Will you marry me?" Lily's breath caught. Her throat constricted the way it always had when emotions threatened to overwhelm her. But this time, the silence didn't hold her captive. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks as she nodded, her lips parting just enough for a whisper to escape. Yes, it was a single word, fragile but whole. Noah slipped the ring onto her trembling hand. For a long moment they stood in the quiet street, wrapped in the glow of something neither had dared dream of. In the days that followed, Lily found her voice returning piece by piece. Not perfect, not steady, but stronger with each attempt. Words that had once been locked away now came haltingly, then more freely, until the silence no longer defined her. She laughed for the first time in years, the sound rusty but real, and Noah laughed with her, as if the sound itself was a miracle. With the company's support, Lily enrolled in a management program, determined to reshape her future. The janitor's cart was gone, replaced with textbooks and late-night study sessions. But this time, she wasn't alone. Noah was there beside her, steady and patient, his hand always within reach. Looking back, she understood that her journey hadn't been about finding a voice in the literal sense. It had been about finding the courage to use it when it mattered most. And in doing so, she had gained more than she ever thought possible: justice, dignity, and love. As spring sunlight spilled through the windows of her new apartment, Lily Morgan stood at the threshold of her new life, a ring on her finger and a future unfolding ahead. Her heart was steady, her voice no longer trapped. The girl who once lived in silence was silent no more.